One thing I think that outlets that focus on music or film or books or, any sort of art, things don't make it on particular sites or in certain magazines because they're whack. Right? It's like, no, we're not covering that. That was whack. And I don't think anything is whacker than putting your hands on a woman.
What's up, geniuses? This is For the Record, and I'm your host, Rob Markman. Now, usually you'll see me here with the musical guest, but we decided to switch things up just a little bit. Something very important going on in music, if you've been paying attention. Last week, Spotify announced that they had banned R. Kelly's music from their playlist, as well as XXXTentacion, and it has caused this whole discussion in music, and we want to talk about it. We want to talk about it with you guys, and especially with our guest today. So first, I have Jamila Lemieux, VP of Programming over at Cassius Life. Jamila, welcome.
Thank you.
And then I have my man, me and this guy work together every day, respective voice. I love just discussing things with him for his perspective as well. And Salam Ahmed, the executive editor over at Genius. So we're teammates over here.
Happy to be here. Happy to argue with Rob in the office all the time. We're going to bring it to the camera for once.
we definitely argue. I mean, I want to get right into it, right? Like, we all know what it is. Last week, Spotify made this announcement. Jamila, what was your initial reaction when Spotify came out and said that they will no longer be promoting R. Kelly's music, putting it on their playlist, and making editorial decisions based off of it?
I mean, I was excited. I have been beating the cancel R. Kelly drum for over a decade. Right. I'm from Chicago. I've been aware of the things that he has done for many years, as well as the things that he's been accused of. And I always make the distinction because there are things that are factual and that have been proven and documented, and then there are things that we've heard. And it's been incredibly just frustrating to see the lack of accountability and the lack of consequences for somebody who has been abusive or has been accused of being abusive to scores of young Black women and girls. And that these accusations go back to the early 90s and that he married Aaliyah. And we know this. He married Aaliyah when she was 15, and the industry has allowed him to have a career. So, it's not the same as being banned from these platforms, but I like to know that if I put on a Sexy Time playlist, R. Kelly's not going to surprise me. Mm-hmm. I've not listened to XXXTentacion. I never knew how to pronounce it. I've only known him through the allegations and the things that have been said about him. And I found them damning enough that I decided never to engage with his music, to feel like, oh man, I have to let this go. I like it. But I'm glad it's unlikely I'll be coming across it on Spotify as well. So I'm glad, and I hope this is a sign of things to come.
And so what was your first reaction when you heard it?
I thought, I agree with you what you said on the moral level, they should be doing something about it, but I thought the decision was very poorly thought out on their part. In fact, the day that, they announced it, I was actually having a meeting with Cameron Johnson, who's actually our social media editor, and we were talking about it, and I was like, yeah, but and both of us were saying, this just opens the door to they're gonna respond what about this person and what about that person? And literally we got out of the meeting and then I went on Twitter and literally I saw, the XXX email that he had sent to the New York Times saying, well, I don't have a comment, but what about this person and what about that person? And I was like, I understood and I sort of admire that Spotify was trying to take a sort of moral stand, editorial stance, but I also just recognized that the way they went about it, I thought was, just short-sighted, and it just opened the door to literally the conversation we're having now. The thing that I really thought that Spotify should have done is actually live up to the title of the hashtag. The title of the hashtag was Mute R. Kelly. And I thought what really Spotify should have done is add a mute button. You should be able to mute an artist like R. Kelly so that when you are listening to the Sexy Time playlist, it doesn't come up. When I listen to Rap Caviar, I'm not subject to having to listen to XXX who you don't morally support. I thought that would make more sense giving the users the option rather than a corporation kind of grandstanding and trying to make this point and then opening the door to this, the responses that we've seen so far and this bigger conversation where, again, it's are they going to ban, how many people are they going to ban from the playlist? I really don't know what they're going to do there.
I want to get into that because you're right, it then shifted the conversation where the conversation was about R. Kelly and then XXX. It was a very pointed conversation about what's going on right now with music. And it did open the door, R. Kelly's representative, kind of responded and were defended R. Kelly in a way is well, all of his music is about love and loving women. What about people with all the lyrics that have hateful anti-women lyrics. So that opens up another door. And like you said, a representative for X's team sent a whole list of other artists like Gene Simmons, like Michael Jackson, like Ozzy Osbourne, like Dr. Dre, who in the past have either had some very severe allegations levied against them or actually been convicted of domestic abuse or violence against women. And neither camp has kind of taken ownership for either what they've done or the very serious allegations, kind of gave them an out in a way. Because while XXX is still their allegations, a lot of what R. Kelly is allegations. Sometimes, look, man, when there's smoke, there's a fire. So if you constantly have these allegations.
If there's 20, 30 years of smoke.
Right. And nobody took responsibility.
Certificate.
And
being acquitted on a technicality because the victim wouldn't participate in the trial.
Which is often the case in those kind of trials.
Right. And that's one thing that I think is really important to remember about R. Kelly, because so often people, especially younger people, and I have to, think about this often. I'm 33, so and from Chicago, right? So I was aware of these things in a way that a lot of people, particularly say a 24-year-old might not be, so they think, well, he was acquitted, right? So usually if somebody's acquitted, that's supposed to be the end of it. And we also have this very selective what acquittal means because we don't feel that because George Zimmerman was acquitted that he didn't murder Trayvon Martin.
Right.
But that R. Kelly's acquittal for those child pornography charges for the tape that was leaked in 2002 and he didn't go on trial until 2008 was simply because the girl would not testify, right? Like it was determined by the court that this was a child between the ages of 14 and 15 at the time where this videotape was made. Her aunt testified and identified her. So there was no confusion. That was not an 18-year-old woman who was built like a 14-year-old. That was a 14-year-old girl. And I think that's the sort of information that a consumer, or a privately owned or publicly traded company can say, I'm not comfortable with allowing this platform to be extended to somebody who has been seen on camera having sex with a teenager, a little girl. I think that's grounds enough. And when it comes to those other artists, like it is complicated, right? Does it open a door? Yes, but I feel that we're oftentimes so afraid of opening this door that we don't, we're afraid of opening the door to too much that we won't do enough.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we can't take any action against R. Kelly. We can't, say that there's any restrictions around his ability to perform or for his music to be streamed because then that means it opens the floodgates. It's like, no, there needs to be some very rigorous standards around any sort of censorship or banning or removing somebody from a platform or not letting them perform in a particular venue. And I think that what he's been accused of and what he's been proven to have done is egregious enough that he qualifies.
Does our cancel list get longer or do we start looking, one thing and Michael Jackson is one, the allegations against Michael for abuse of children or just improper relationships with children is a mile long, right? Michael Jackson is the king of pop. We've all been raised on Michael Jackson's music. Like, do we look at Michael Jackson or is this just a distraction? This is not the conversation that we're having now, the conversation we're having now. Like, how do we start to reconcile with that, do you guys think?
I mean, personally, when it comes to Michael Jackson, I have read quite a bit, about what he was accused of, and I've read both sides, and I don't feel comfortable saying that I think he was guilty.
Right.
Okay.
That's not to say that he could not possibly have been guilty. His relationships with young kids were certainly not the relationship that I would want for my child or any adult that I know to have with a child.
Definitely funny in the light is what they say.
Looks funny in the light, but I don't necessarily believe that he was guilty of those things. If I felt confident saying that he was, if we had the sort of proof that we have with R. Kelly, then I think that would be a different conversation. Okay. And I think that it is important that, it's not about making the cancel list long just to make sure we don't miss anybody, but that it's highly curated.
Right.
I think that the threshold for cancellation it has to be high.
Right. The threshold is very low currently.
You think? I don't think so. We say that, but Bill O'Reilly's getting another show. Right. You know what I mean? We talk about what these accusations do to people, but we haven't seen the impact on that many careers. Right. It's but a handful of folks who've really seen an accusation or a proven act of abuse or be it domestic violence or sexual violence toward a woman or girl or another person actually end a career. And if you look at hip hop, I don't want to say in particular, if you look at the music industry, the number of people who have survived these accusations is far longer than the number of people who haven't been.
Well, I just want to clarify what I meant by when I said cancel being the standard being low. The standard of like Twitter, sort of somebody says one kind of thing, and not necessarily commits a crime. I think where we're talking about in the context of this conversation is criminal action, and this
Right.
is a different thing. But one other artist I wanted to talk about in the relation to this too, we were talking about the standard being convicted, and that how we think some people are innocent, some people aren't. One of the few artists, and as far as rap artists that I could think of as a prominent artist who's actually convicted of rape is Tupac. Right? Tupac is one of those few artists. A lot of people, including myself, I don't know how true that trial really was. And if you watch some of the documentaries about Pac, it makes it seem like Pac was kind of set up, and there's a lot of shady stuff with it. But again, it gets complicated because then when we start following the standard of, well, what is the standard of the law? But a lot of people are, like we said, we don't really trust the law always. We don't trust, for example, George Zimmerman was acquitted. We don't really believe that either. That's where it's so complicated and so unclear, and it starts to get so muddled that I'm not sure where any of this stuff really falls.
I think that one thing that, as an African American woman, that I've had to learn to do is really recognizing the difference between, it's something my father has taught me, the difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law, right? And that oftentimes both things fail, particularly people of color in this country. And so I don't see conviction as the standard for, is this person guilty or not? I don't see the absence of a conviction as proof of innocence. So Tupac's case is certainly complicated, and that he was accused, that though he was convicted, the accusations were centered around, as I recall, an instance where he had an encounter with a woman. He had a sexual encounter with a woman, and by his own telling, looked the other way when two of his friends went on to continue the encounter without the consent of the woman, right? Which is a disgusting and awful thing to do. Right. It is essentially facilitating rape as opposed to actively being the rapist. But he was the one who was successfully convicted and spent the most time incarcerated as a result. I am disappointed at what he did by the things that he admits to, and there's a lot of questions about what else happened, and did you do more than what you said you did? Right. Did you do more than what the law said you did? What actually happened? But I'd say the difference being that Tupac is dead. Right. There is a lack of clarity, right? That I think is just surrounds that situation. However, I think that what you said earlier about there being a mute functionality, and in theory that should be for any artist. It shouldn't be, and maybe if you were asked why, that may provide the platform with some insight as to why are people doing ththese things. Why would you not want to hear a Chris Brown song? Why would you not want to hear an R. Kelly song? Are you not listening to Tupac because you don't like Tupac? Or are you not listening to Tupac on some sort of moral ground? And I affirm and understand why anyone would make that decision about his music. I am leery of bringing in deceased folks into this because they are not able to, they're not continuing to record music, they're not touring, they're not able to reap the benefits of what their product can bring, fiscally in terms of exposure and opportunity in the way that they did when they were alive. So that would certainly be a different conversation around Tupac if he were still here.
One of the things I would argue, and I was having a conversation with I had a video here at Genius, Regina DeLay, who hates when I shout her out, but she made a very good point when we were speaking about it this morning, is that, maybe back in the 90s, first of all, I was a fan and I wasn't a journalist back then. I maybe didn't have the power to facilitate these conversations and didn't quite fully understand what I was listening to, or even when you just bring back these long lists of artists from previous generations, there were a lot of things that unfortunately were acceptable back then. The fact is that's 2018, and if we want things to change, like eventually you're gonna have to take a stand. You can't just be like, well, in the 90s it was okay, so it's okay. Okay, maybe it was, you could skate past that in the 90s and the 80s. And what is clearly becoming the case, or looking like the case, is that, in 2018 that we got to take a stand, and you won't allow this. So maybe future generations of artists will, come into the game knowing that this type of thing isn't okay. And if you want to have a successful career as an artist, be a human being and not,
Not a predator, right? Not a rapist, not an abuser. And I think that these should be barriers, right? Like in many, not most, not all, but in a lot of fields of industry and a lot of social circles, that would prevent you from doing certain things, right? If it were like, we know that this guy cannot keep his hands to himself when he's around an attractive young woman, we're not going to allow him into this space, right? Or we know that this person has been, beating his wife or beating her husband. Like, that should be the sort of thing that necessitates a conversation at the very least, and for so many years, people have looked the other way. And we look the other way in our churches and our schools and our communities. This isn't just the industry, but the way that, there's a lot of things at hand. There's the way that we value, I think, genius or perceived genius or creative talent, and so we allow creatives, I think, latitude that we wouldn't allow for, say, a doctor. Right. A neurosurgeon, right? Like that if we knew that this person is abusive, arguably, yeah, there have been hospitals and said, like, we've heard these things about him. Yeah, he got another DUI. Yeah, him and his wife are always fighting, but he is the most gifted surgeon that we have in this department. We have to figure out a way to make things work. I'm not saying that doesn't happen elsewhere.
Well, we are seeing it with the Michigan State and
absolutely.
They just give out the big settlement, $500 million settlement just today.
Yeah, but like, look at how many and how many girls that he was able to
dozens and dozens
prey on to before that happened, right? And also, but still, there's that there's still a celebrity factor there. You know what I mean? So even though he was not famous to the layperson who's not, we're talking about Larry Nassar. So if you're not following the world of gymnastics, you might not know his name, but you know that we send a team to the Olympics, right?
And he was revered.
He was revered. And that so many of those girls came through his tutelage. And so, or rather who were treated by him. So we have to value victims more than we do the work, the financial success, the creativity, or the identity of the person who has victimized them. And the other thing is, when it comes to the music industry and these conversations that we're having right now, particularly around hip hop, is that so many of the accused are Black men, right? Are young Black men, or were young Black men at the point where the original assault or allegation may have happened. And we have this instinct, right? So going back to this, like, I can't always trust a conviction. I can't always
You don't trust the justice system.
Yeah. I don't trust the justice system. And I've been trained to protect men who look like me from the justice system, right? So even if I'm the victim, there's this thing that, like, one, are people gonna believe me?
Right.
What might happen to me if the law is involved? Did I have weed in my pocket? Was I out past curfew? Am I going to feel the heavy hand of the law even though I've been victimized? And then also, what will happen to this person? Right. And so this idea that we have to protect R. Kelly is insane. It makes no sense.
But it even goes on. I'm sorry to cut you off because I've seen you be very vocal about this. It's like, protecting the Black male, which oftentimes the justice system doesn't protect, right? But also on the flip side is, and I don't know who XXX is alleged victim was, but with R. Kelly, the victims were all African American or Black women, and also the not protecting of Black women as who are victims. And
I've seen, how do you, XXX is
Tentacion.
I've seen, his accuser, and she looks to be a Black woman, or certainly a woman of color, and young, and I would assume not class mobile. So anything that might have protected her from him or his celebrity, those factors aren't there. But we're protecting Black men, or we think we're protecting Black men and boys by removing this accountability for things that they may have done and calling that our duty to as a race. But what about the Blackness of these victims? Like, are they not Black women? And I'm also not willing to sacrifice a white girl.
Right.
You know what I mean? If all of R. Kelly's accusers were white girls, I would feel exactly the same way. I'd probably be more stunned than we'd be having this discussion, because I think we would have nipped this in the bud a long time ago if Aaliyah were Britney Spears.
The likelihood of justice there would be much higher.
Yes.
Right. I mean, that's the other part about this. When we do expand the list, you're talking about the expanded cancel list. To your point, the justice system obviously and incontrovertibly targets young Black men. It does not really target young white men the same way. And if there's young white men who are, doing the kind of things that R. Kelly is doing, the likelihood of us finding out about that, the likelihood of them being arrested and that being reported is much lower by default.
Absolutely.
And what about isms that you talked about? I mean, Dr. Dre's name pops up on the list. big puns, name, men of color in hip hop, but Gene Simmons,
Yeah.
Jimmy Page, David Bowie has had allegations,
John Lennon.
Nick Carter from the Backstreet Boys. So this is a thing that extends the predatory nature of this extends past black
this
artists.
This is not a hip hop thing. This
Right.
is not a black thing.
Right.
This is this is a thing.
It's
this
a thing
This
of
is
all
a
of
rape
society.
culture thing.
Yeah.
This is a global phenomenon and worse in other places than it is here. But I think that like you said, the whataboutism. I worked at Ebony magazine for many years, and we put Bill Cosby on the cover, and the whatabouts. Some of them were just comical. Why didn't you put Jared from Subway on the cover?
Right.
Why would we put Jared from Subway on the cover of
Ebony.
any magazine? You know what I mean? Short of people, you know what I mean? That would actually be reporting that, let alone Ebony magazine or the dad from Seventh Heaven. Why aren't you ever? I don't ever see you talking about the dad from Seventh Heaven. I'm like, you don't even know his name.
Right.
So how could he be? How relevant is he to you that you're not aware of his name? And that I speak up and have used my platforms and have participated in work that affirms the rights of victims of survivors of all creeds and colors. But I also know how unlikely it is that how few people stand up for black girls and women. Right. So that's where I stand up for black men and boys for certain, and I stand up for black girls and women with an exclamation point at times because we don't have many places to get that, And
we all work in the media, and leads right into my next question is, how do we all deal with that? Spotify made the statement, right? I know at Genius, it's a constant conversation, especially for our flagship series, Verified, that most everybody knows. I know our YouTube channel knows. On the yellow background, we publish one a day, and we talk about each and every artist that we bring in here. We haven't made the statement that Spotify has made. I'll be honest. We had NBA YoungBoy in for one episode, and oh my God, it did amazing numbers-wise. So we had him come back again. So NBA YoungBoy shot a second episode with us. The day after he shot that second episode, the video leaked of him in the hotel lobby assaulting the young woman, his child's mother. We didn't run that second episode once we were presented with that information because we didn't feel comfortable. I don't know that we all have it figured out, but with every instance we talk about it. Does this make us feel good? Is this something that we can support? Who's the victim here? What's the allegation? How serious is it? How real is it? And we move accordingly, without necessarily making the statement that Spotify made, because there is so much gray area. So we do a case-by-case basis, but very cognizant of what we put out there. How is that something that you all over at The Cassius Life deal with, and are you presented with this?
Yeah, I mean, there's constant dialogue about who's covered and how, and who's affirmed and who's just presented. And you would not be getting something about R. Kelly's new music from Cassius or any platform that I've ever been had any sort of leadership role with while I was there. We make space to hold these conversations, and they're difficult, and sometimes they mean having a complicated conversation about someone we really care about. The allegations that Khalees put forward about Nas were, I'm never that shocked, but I was still relatively surprised, and I don't know if it was just that, and that's just one that I'd not heard. There are a lot of things I've heard about a lot of people, some. You then get some evidence, or like you said, you hear it enough times that you believe that there's probably some truth to it. Then sometimes, like, I've heard that once and I had never heard it again. I never heard anything like that about Nas, and it's someone I've been a very big fan of. But knowing now that when we talk about Nas, that we have to approach that differently. That we have to at the very least hold space for the conversation, engaging her allegations. We can't dismiss them wholesale. And he has not come forward and said, I didn't do it. Right? I think that's the other thing. The rush to be objective and the rush to defend, objectivity is one thing, but I see a defensiveness, in hip hop media. And I've seen people be quiet, but in the last few weeks, I've heard more Nas songs randomly. I've heard R. Kelly music, just cars going by or just coming, seeing things on people's timelines. And I'm like, you're not saying it with your chest. you don't feel comfortable saying I stand with or I don't believe this, but you want to just, but you're still showing support in this very kind of subtle, underhanded way.
Right.
And I think that for people who work, and I've seen this coming from people who work in media, which I think is in poor taste. I'd rather you say, here's why I don't necessarily believe those things, or here's something I think you all should consider. But as far as outlet goes, that is the Cassius outlet and other outlets, that's a constant conversation, and it's difficult. It's not easy work, and I think that if we were more honest about that, as opposed to, it's too hard, so let's just not even try, or just ban them all, I think that that's appropriate for some places, like I would expect that a feminist publication can say, we're just not, at the point where you had an accusation, you're just canceled. I think that's appropriate. I also think that for spaces that, I love DJ Booth.
Right.
Like that's
DJ Booth does a great job.
DJ Booth does such a good job of and I don't know who, I haven't seen a lot of faces to names. I'm not entirely sure who's running
Nathan,
it.
DJ Z.
But or and I mean, I should say I've read the names in the bylines, but I don't know who exactly they are or where they came from. It's just one day the site was on my radar, and I'm like, this is the hip hop site that I have wanted. You know what I mean? Like, this is the one I wish I had when I was a teenager, when I was trying to figure out what to do about the fact that DMX was accused of rape. And the only thing I knew to do was to take the tape back to the store. Just
did
really,
you did that when you found out?
Yeah, and this is like 1999,
wow.
and I had a tape. Like, it was a tape, but all I heard was the accusation, and then later the charges were dropped, and it's a different news cycle, like you're getting things in Blaze or in Vibe,
Did you go buy the tape back, or was that moment just passed?
I think that moment had passed. I'm pretty sure I brought the next album,
that's real, though.
But anyway, I just love the way that they have these really complicated conversations and challenge their listeners and readers to think about this stuff. And I think that's our real responsibility, is to get people thinking.
And how do, because Ince works on the editorial side of Genius, and I do a lot more of the video work. How does editorial handle it? Because we have covered XXX editorially to a fair degree, not without context of everything that's going on with it. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that for me, especially working on the editorial and just a vision of what our site should be, I think the reporting is so important. The reason we're having these conversations, the reason we're even able to talk about someone like Harvey Weinstein, is because of Ronan Farrow's reporting in The New Yorker. The real
reporting.
Real true reporting. The real reason, again, XXX is someone who, when he was first popping off, we interviewed him. We didn't know we knew he had charges, but we assumed it was like
he was still in jail.
He was still in jail.
It was a phone charge, and we didn't quite. We knew it was an assault charge, but wasn't quite sure who the
details were not.
And I think the reporting of when Pitchfork actually put out the police report that had the details of the assault and stuff, and it was like, oh my God. And it's like, I don't want to say he's guilty, because libely that's not true. But like when I read it, I was like, oh, this guy's guilty. Like that detail, you can't make that up. That's true. And again, the R. Kelly conversation we're having now, it's coming back around. Again, a lot of great reporting is done. So I think for us, reporting on that stuff, I mean, one of the other artists we didn't mention, but in this mix is Tekashi 6ix9ine. I first saw Tekashi popping off because I saw his numbers on the site, and I noticed him on, Spotify and SoundCloud. I was like, oh, this guy's pretty good. Let's look into him. And I told, Chris Mensch, who's our news writer, and I told him, hey, look into it, and let's do something. And then he started looking into it, and was like, wait a minute, I think this guy is a pedophile, and like there's charges, and people are saying this. And then we looked into it, and then we actually got the police report. Thank you to Jacques Morel, who is our anchor, who actually did some of the reporting on that. And we put that story out, and that's actually one of our biggest stories ever. So, but every time we write about XXX, the other side of this for us too, editorially, like you mentioned, like if a feminist platform has a certain stance, or if you're a reporting platform, what is your stance? For us, we're a music platform, and every piece of Genius editorial is about the actual music. There's a lot of instances and things that happen where we don't cover it because it doesn't relate directly to the music. But with artists like 6ix9ine or artists like XXX, their music relates directly to it. XXX, a lot of his music is, raps about, oh, this girl broke my heart and this and that. And it's like, he's basically trying to make this justification, like, she broke my heart and cheated on me, so I get to beat her. It's like, no, you don't. That's not how this works. So covering that and providing that context of like, here's the logic that he's using in his music, here's what his music is about, here's what he's saying, and here's the context of that. I think that's the information I want to provide to the audience, because the information is the key, and the conversation, to your point, is the key. Telling people what it is the difference, because again, we talk about someone like Bill Cosby. Bill Cosby, it was known for a long time that he was doing this, but it wasn't reported that kind of way. It was the kind of thing that was buried in a story.
Well, Hannibal Buress was
it was a comedian.
The spark that reignited that.
And again, because people covered Hannibal Buress' set and they wrote about it, and it was like, oh, well, is that true? And then people started doing the research. And then I think the moment for Cosby, again, I thought it was a media moment. It was the New York Mag cover that had all 50 of his accusers, or I forget exactly how many it was.
Almost 60.
Almost 60 accusers on there. And it was like, okay, you know what we were saying before. When there's a whole lot of smoke, there's definitely a fire. And all the conversation that we're having has been made possible by journalism standards. This is the role of journalism in society, and I think that's the role for us too. Now, our role is somewhat limited again because we are very focused on music journalism and on like how people are making records, and that's what the Genius brand is all about. But when artists, and you know, again, when you look at R. Kelly's music. This guy's first album was called 12 Play. You know, he called himself the Pied Piper for like 20 years. I don't know how we let him do it. And again, he wrote Aaliyah's records when he was married to her and she was 15.
And he's on the back. The album is called Age Ain't Nothing But a Number. He's in the background looking at her.
Can I be honest? All of that went over my head as a kid, as a teenager, and like, you know, it's hard for me. Like you sing "I Believe I Could Fly," or kids sing "I Believe I Could Fly" at graduations. Like that was a Space Jam song. I'm not saying this right, but it's so ingrained in us. Like we were raised on it. Like at the time, I didn't see it. Oh man, I loved Aaliyah. I had like just like in awe of Aaliyah.
Yeah.
And at the age ain't nothing. It dawned on me years later, like holy, like for real, dog.
It seemed off to me at the time, but it didn't like I was a little kid, so I didn't have certainly didn't have the voice or the wherewithal to really ask those questions like, why is this 27-year-old man and this 15-year-old girl, like what's going on here? This doesn't look right. I'm not, I don't know people who do this. Why is this happening?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I was around 14, 15 when the R. Kelly tape became I remember bootleggers selling it on the streets of 25th.
Barbershops.
And everywhere. It was everywhere. And like the story of that time, I didn't even sort of understand the context of the statutory thing. I think maybe I did understand it, but not as much as like the P. The P became the thing and like the Chappelle joke. But what was weird about that time too was like that was a big part of the conversation. And then he made "Step in the Name of Love," and then he made a bunch of other. He made the Ignition remix, perhaps his most celebrated.
I couldn't understand how. I've never seen the tape. I never watched it because when they were advertising what it was, and I was like, oh, I have no interest in watching this. I don't watch child pornography. Why would I watch this? The way that it was a very weird time. The way it circulated.
I saw some of it in my dorm room freshman year at Howard. My roommate, who was also from Chicago, it must have been like on Napster or something, and I don't know how or why or what triggered us deciding to, And we only could watch a few seconds, and it was horrifying, but we watched enough to know, and I am glad that I did this, that there was never any doubt how young she was, that no human being who knows anything about human development could look at that person and mistake her for even 17 or 18, let alone a full-grown woman, and this is somebody who's in his 30s. At this point,
I'm glad we got to be able to have this conversation. And the goal wasn't to walk away with any type of answer or like I don't know where we go from here, but I know I think we started something that is going to change the way that we deal with music as fans, as journalists, just as society. I hope so.
One thing when I was listening to you talk about, like Genius's approach, and I love the work you all do too. I'd be remiss in not saying that, especially from where it started to now, it's like it's incredible, But one thing I think that outlets that focus on music or film or books or any sort of art, things don't make it on particular sites or in certain magazines because they're whack. Right? It's like, no, we're not covering that. That was whack. And I don't think anything is whacker than putting your hands on a woman, right? Or raping somebody or being abusive in some sort of way. And so if not making great work can keep you, keep you out the door, if your personal relationships with people can do harm to your career. When I say personal relationships, I mean, say Ja Rule versus 50 Cent, not necessarily somebody that you've abused or been abused by. Or getting dropped by your label, any number of factors. Like the people who are at the top of this industry are not the best people, right? Some of them are Beyonce, and a lot of them are not, right? Like some people get to the top or get constant coverage or get to be working artists because they're great at what they do, and a lot of people get there because of luck, you know? And so I think that the idea that we have to protect art more than we have to protect people it's wrong, you know, it's wrong from a moral standpoint, but again, just kind of looking at who gets to be a big, huge star, you know, who gets to be a rapper who's on tour and who doesn't, when we know that there are people who are at home, who can sing and write a song as well as R. Kelly, you know, who can rap better than XXX, you know, so I don't think there's anything wrong with an outlet or a streaming service. That you're not owed a career in the music industry. Nobody has to have that, you know. So if somebody loses that on the basis of something they've been accused of or something that they have done, I don't feel, you know, unless these are completely false allegations. And again, that's why I think the threshold, there should be some rigorous reporting. There needs to be some knowledge, right?
Right.
But I don't think that's unfair. I don't think we're destroying art by saying R. Kelly should never be heard on a radio station again. You know, I don't think that that's wrong.
I agree with you. Yeah, is that you know, when you talk about unfair, oh, it's unfair to the artist. You know who is really unfair to is the victim. Is being treated the most unfairly. And you know, I think you know, you made a very good point that we have to go. You know, when we start caring about the preservation of art before protecting people and actual victims, there's a problem. You know, I do think, honestly, like it definitely made us look like, you know, we think we're doing it the right way and we approach every day. And, you know, I think outlets everywhere, editorial outlets everywhere looked at, it forces you to look at what you're doing, what you're promoting, and how can you cover music better. And I think that's what we're all here to do. But I thank you guys, Jamila. I thank you for coming. I know you gotta go. We're gonna get you out of here. She got a flight to catch. She is everywhere, but you can catch her on Cassius Life for sure. And Ince, man, thank you, man. I know, you know.
I work upstairs.
You work upstairs. I owe you lunch, bro. But thank you for being a guest on the show. And so next week, we'll see you. It's For the Record.